The sharp slam of car doors cut through the calm, golden quiet of my ranch that morning. I raised my mug of coffee and squinted toward the sound. A minivan sat parked just outside my private gate, and 4 strangers were unloading paddleboards and coolers like they owned the place. They walked right past a large red private property sign, laughing and chatting excitedly about their lake day. I set down my mug and walked toward them, my boots crunching on the gravel. "Excuse me," I called out firmly. "This is private property. The lake isn't open to the public." A woman in oversized designer sunglasses turned to me, eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "But we booked this online," she said, holding up her phone. "Paid $75 for the day. Look." My stomach tightened as she showed me a booking confirmation, Peaceful Waters Lake Access. That was my lake. I had never authorized any kind of booking system. "Where exactly did you book this?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. She scrolled on her phone and landed on the Riverside Estates HOA community page. The listing announced a brand new amenity for residents and their guests. Of course, Riverside Estates. And I already knew exactly whose fingerprints were all over this mess. Let me back up a bit. My name's David Thornton, and for the last 15 years, I've owned a 100-acre ranch. Nestled right in the middle of it is a pristine 20-acre lake I've kept private and protected. My land sits just outside the Riverside Estates HOA boundary line, which has always been a blessing. And lately, a curse. About 6 months ago, the HOA crowned itself a new president, Patricia Hartwell. But everyone in the neighborhood had another name for her: Karen. She was in her early 50s, always perfectly put together, with the personality of a drill sergeant crossed with a pushy used car salesman. From the moment she stepped into power, she'd been eyeing my lake like a hawk. It started subtly, little suggestions, during community meetings I attended out of courtesy. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could expand our community amenities?" she'd say, locking eyes with me. "That beautiful lake just sitting there. Imagine if it were enjoyed by everyone." Every single time, I'd politely but firmly decline. The lake wasn't just some pretty body of water. It was my sanctuary. A carefully managed habitat for native fish and a nesting ground for local waterfowl. But Karen didn't understand the meaning of no. Her campaign escalated. First came the letters, official HOA letterhead, suggesting I consider supervised community events. Then came the surprise drop-ins, where she'd appear at my gate with committee members, pitching how sharing resources would be good for the community. I kept refusing, but listing my lake online without my permission? That was a whole new level of audacity. After sending the confused family away with apologies and a promise to clear things up, I marched straight to my computer. Sure enough, there it was on the Riverside Estates website, a slick listing full of photos of my lake taken from the roadside, pricing packages, and fake 5-star reviews about the peaceful atmosphere and great fishing. The page claimed it was a new partnership between the HOA and local landowners to enhance community value, and listed at the bottom, "Contact Patricia Hartwell." I printed out every page and called my lawyer, Janet Morrison. "She's charging people to access your private property without consent," Janet said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "David, this is textbook fraud and trespassing, and that's just for starters. What do you recommend?" I asked. "We can fire off a cease, press charges, sue for damages," Janet rattled off. "But let me dig a little deeper. With people like this, sometimes a smarter play wins the war." Over the next week, I documented everything. More families showed up with bookings in hand. I politely turned them away and collected their names as potential witnesses. I installed security cameras to catch every trespassing attempt. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't backing down. She emailed me personally, accusing me of being selfish and hurting property values by keeping the lake to myself. Then came Janet's call. "David," she said, almost laughing, "you're not going to believe this. The property right next to yours, the 5-acre lot that borders both your land and Karen's, just went on the market. The Millers are divorcing and need a fast sale." I leaned back in my chair. That piece of land was strategic. It sat right between Karen's house and the only easy access point to my lake from the Riverside Estates side. Whoever owned that lot controlled the choke point, "What are you thinking?" I asked, though I already had a good idea. "I'm thinking the best defense is a solid offense," she replied. "I've got a real estate attorney who can set up an LLC. You can buy it anonymously." The plan came together fast. I formed Pine Valley Investments and made an all-cash offer, 20 grand over asking. The Millers jumped on it. 2 weeks later, the deal closed. Karen had no clue who the new owner was. The morning after closing, I hired a construction crew. At 7 a.m. sharp, they began installing an 8-foot privacy fence along the border between the Miller property and Karen's backyard. It was legal, fully up to code, and it completely cut off her view and access to the lake. Around noon, I heard the screech of tires. A silver luxury SUV came to an abrupt stop at the fence line. Karen Hartwell had arrived. She stormed out of her SUV like a hurricane in yoga pants, her face already flushed with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked at the construction foreman, her voice slicing through the afternoon air. "You can't put a fence here." "This blocks the lake access." The foreman, a steady man named Roberto, who'd clearly dealt with his share of irate neighbors, didn't even flinch. "We're just following the property owner's instructions, ma'am," he said calmly. "Everything's permitted and legal. Who owns this property?" Karen barked, hands on her hips. "I demand to speak with them immediately." "You'll need to contact Pine Valley Investments," Roberto replied, unfazed. "Ma'am, I just built fences." I watched the whole spectacle from my porch, sipping my coffee while the security camera captured every moment in glorious HD. The next few hours turned into free entertainment. Karen must have made at least 15 phone calls. County recorder's office, real estate agents, even the police. None of it worked. Law enforcement politely informed her that the property owner had every right to build a legal fence on their land. By evening, she'd tracked down my LLC's registered agent, Janet. The voicemail she left was pure gold. "I know this is David Thornton's doing," she screeched. "This is harassment. That fence is blocking established community lake access. I'll sue. I'll have him arrested. The entire HOA board will hear about this." Janet called me that night, still laughing. "Want me to respond?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let's see how far she goes." I didn't have to wait long. The next morning was Saturday, and chaos arrived right on schedule. A dozen families showed up, paddleboards in tow, waving their Lake Day reservations at the new fence. Karen had to meet them at the blocked entrance, fumbling her way through increasingly desperate excuses as she handed out refunds from her own pocket. But Monday morning was when the fireworks truly began. I received an official HOA notice demanding I remove the fence immediately and cease interfering with community lake access. They had called an emergency board meeting for Wednesday evening. Perfect. When the evening arrived, I walked into the packed community center with Janet by my side and a thick folder of evidence tucked under my arm. Karen sat at the board table, practically glowing with smugness. She thought she had me cornered. "Before we begin," I said, standing to address the room, "I'd like to clarify something. This fence you're complaining about, it's on land I legally purchased. I have every right to fence my property." Karen's face went pale. You bought the Miller property," she stammered. "Through Pine Valley Investments?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "Completely legal. And just as property owners have the right to fence their land, they also have the right to control access to it. Which brings me to my next point. I opened the folder and began handing out documents to each board member. "These are screenshots of an unauthorized booking system charging people to access my lake, on my land, which sits outside HOA jurisdiction. This is fraud, theft by deception, criminal trespassing." The expressions around the board table shifted from mild confusion to alarm. "Furthermore," I continued, "here are signed statements from 37 families who paid for lake access, security camera footage documenting trespassing, and a particularly interesting email from Ms. Hartwell herself, accusing me of being, and I quote, selfish for not sharing my property." An older board member named Thomas cleared his throat. "Patricia," he said, turning toward her, "is this true? Did you list this man's private lake online without permission?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was trying to increase community value. The lake was just sitting there unused. It's my private property, I said firmly. You had no right to list it, no right to charge people for access, and no right to pocket the money. Which raises another question. Where did all those booking fees go? The room fell silent. Sandra, another board member, leaned forward. Patricia, did you keep the money from these bookings? It was for the HOA, Karen said weakly. Administrative fees for managing the amenity. Show us the deposits, Thomas demanded. If this were official HOA business, there should be records. Karen's face turned from white to pink to deep, blotchy red. I was going to transfer it. I just hadn't gotten around to it yet. Janet stepped forward. My client is prepared to file criminal charges for fraud, theft, trespassing, and harassment, she said evenly. However, he's willing to consider alternatives if the board takes appropriate action. The meeting exploded. Board members shouted over each other, demanding her resignation. Someone yelled about liability. Someone else mentioned lawsuits from scammed families. And when someone brought up calling the district attorney, the panic on Karen's face was unmistakable. She tried pounding her gavel, shouting about proper procedure, but nobody was listening anymore. The vote to remove her as HOA president was unanimous, but that wasn't the end. Word spread fast through Riverside Estates. Karen's part-time real estate brokerage opened an ethics investigation after multiple clients complained. The families she'd duped demanded not only refunds but compensation for their ruined weekends. 2 weeks later, as I was working on my dock, a process server showed up. "Are you Patricia Hartwell?" he asked, looking confused. "No," I replied, chuckling. "I'm David Thornton. She lives in Riverside Estates." He checked his papers. Huh. This lists her new address as the adjacent lot. And that's how I found out Karen had panic sold her house at a massive loss, desperately trying to buy the Miller property from Pine Valley Investments. She'd submitted an offer directly to Janet's office, never realizing it was my LLC. Janet politely declined. The process server eventually found her at her mother's house across town. She was being sued by the district attorney's office for fraud and theft by deception. 17 counts. One for each family she scammed before I shut her down. 3 months later, word trickled back through the neighborhood. She'd pled guilty to reduced charges. 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and $23,000 in restitution and fines. The last time anyone saw her was the day she came to collect her belongings from her foreclosed home. Roberto, the fence contractor, happened to be installing a decorative gate on my new property. He told me she sat in her car for 20 long minutes, just staring at the fence that had ended her HOA empire. Before driving away, I kept the Miller property and turned it into a small nature preserve, native trees, a butterfly garden, and a walking path. Ironically, the new HOA board, far more reasonable than their predecessor, even gave me a Community Beautification Award for improving neighborhood aesthetics. And on that fence, in elegant lettering, hangs a sign that says it all: private property.